Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where we discuss leading political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. And first up, we begin with the Chinese economy. China's long stretch of deflation showed tentative signs of moderating in August, even as consumer prices slipped back into negative territory. The latest data suggests Beijing's campaign to curb overcapacity and stabilize demand may be making an impact, though the path to a sustained rebound remains uncertain, and some of the costs are already manifesting themselves, something that we'll be covering in part 3 of today's video. The Producer Price Index, PPI, fell 2.9% year-on-year in August, the 35th straight month of contraction. While still firmly in deflationary territory, the decline narrowed from July's 3.6% drop, marking the first improvement in 6 months. Upstream industries, including coal, mining, steel, and metals processing, posted month-on-month gains, a shift that could point to early stabilization in factory gate prices. At the consumer level, however, deflation deepened. The Consumer Price Index, CPI, fell 0.4% from a year earlier, compared with economists' expectations for a 0.2% decline. Food costs down 4.3% were the main driver, with fresh vegetable prices plunging more than 15%, the steepest fall since late 2022. That dragged the headline CPI into negative territory for the 5th time this year. Still, underlying price momentum was less bleak. Core CPI, which strips out volatile food and energy components, rose 0.9%, an 18th month high, supported by government subsidies and stronger demand for durable goods. Household appliance prices surged 4.6% from a year earlier, the largest increase since records began in 2001, while gold jewelry rose 8.6%. Market reaction to the mixed inflation data was muted. Long-term government bond yields held steady at 2.2%, while the currency was little changed against the dollar. Economists noted that while producer deflation appears to be easing, consumer price weakness underscores fragile household demand and fading policy support. Analysts remain cautious about declaring a turning point. Quote, "The smaller drop in factory gate prices is an early sign Beijing's anti-involution pledges are easing price pressures," end quote, said Eric Zhu of Bloomberg Economics. Quote, "But improvement looks driven more by expectations than concrete measures and won't last unless the government delivers on production curbs and demand stimulus." End quote. The stakes are high too. China is now in its 3rd consecutive year of deflation, an unprecedented stretch since the reform era began in the late 1970s. Persistent price declines squeeze corporate margins, erode household incomes, and reduce tax revenues. Whether August's numbers signal a durable easing of deflation will depend on Beijing's ability to sustain curbs on overproduction and foster stronger consumer spending. After years of deflation challenging policymakers to do just this, this is of course easier said than done, and we'll be following this space very closely going forward. Next up, tensions in the South China Sea. China has formally declared Scarborough Shoal a national nature reserve, cementing its de facto occupation of the disputed reef in the South China Sea and heightening tensions with the Philippines. The announcement, made by China's State Council and published by state media Wednesday, comes just weeks after a rare incident in which a Chinese naval vessel collided with a China Coast Guard ship while harassing a Philippine Coast Guard vessel in the same waters. Known in China as Huangyandao, the shore will now be designated the Huangyan Island National Nature Reserve. Under Chinese law, such reserves are divided into tightly regulated zones, including core areas off limits to all activity, buffer zones permitting only scientific research, and experimental zones where visits may be allowed with Beijing's approval. Foreigners seeking entry must obtain authorization from Chinese authorities, effectively tightening Beijing's control over the reef. The move poses an immediate challenge to Philippine fishermen who have long relied on Scarborough Shoal as a traditional fishing ground. Analysts warn that the reserve designation will provide new justifications for Chinese maritime forces to restrict access, harass boats, and enforce exclusion zones under the guise of environmental protection. Manila, which has consistently protested Chinese activities around the shoal, views the latest step as a direct violation of its sovereignty and rights under international law. Beijing, of course, claims this area for its own and says that it is simply enforcing its own sovereign rights. Scarborough Shoal has been a flashpoint for years. In 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague ruled against China's China's expansive claims in the South China Sea, finding no legal basis for Beijing's so-called nine-dash line. China has rejected the ruling, continuing to expand its presence and fortify contested areas. The shoal's strategic significance extends beyond fishing rights. Located about 120 nautical miles from the Philippine coast, it sits along vital sea lanes and has been viewed by the US and regional allies as a test case for freedom of navigation. Last month, China claimed to have expelled a US Navy ship from the area, a characterization Washington dismissed as false. By rebranding Scarborough Shoal as a nature reserve, Beijing has both tightened its grip and sought to cloak its territorial expansion in environmental language, a move that is likely to inflame disputes, deepen US-Philippine security cooperation, and further strain already volatile South China Sea dynamics. Now, we have one more development to cover, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. If you'd like to continue to be on top of the most up-to-date analysis on China, consider subscribing. And if you'd like to help keep the channel financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everyone, for the ongoing support. Finally, for today, we return to the economy and the theme of overcapacity. China's electric vehicle sector, long hailed as a global leader in scale and innovation, is bracing for a brutal round of consolidation. BYD, the country's largest EV maker, has warned that a, quote, bloodbath, end quote, is looming in the domestic auto industry after Beijing moved to stamp out aggressive discounting practices that fueled rapid sales growth but eroded profitability. Speaking at the Munich Motor Show, Stella Li, BYD's executive vice president, said roughly 100 of China's 130 electric and hybrid car makers would eventually be, quote, pushed out, end quote, of the market. Quote, even 20 OEMs is too much, end quote, she remarked, underscoring the intensity of competition in the world's largest EV market. The comments echo forecasts from rivals such as XPeng, which has suggested the global industry may shrink to as few as 10 dominant players over the next decade. The Chinese government has targeted so-called neijuan, or involution, a term describing destructive competition as a drag on the broader economy and a contributor to deflation. Most economists refer to this as overcapacity, but this term has become politically sensitive in China as it has been used as justification for global trade restrictions on Chinese exports. Price wars in autos, which slashed EV sticker prices and pressured margins, became a political concern this year. In response, regulators have cracked down on discounting and long-term supplier payment practices, upending sales strategies across the sector. The consequences for automakers have been stark. BYD, despite its global scale and technological lead, reported weaker than expected second quarter profits and revenues. Citi analysts have cut their sales forecast for BYD by more than 1 million units per year through 2027, highlighting the challenges even for market leaders. Across the industry, profits in China's automotive manufacturing sector fell nearly 12% in the first 5 months of 2025, with margins shrinking to 4.3% from 5.7% in 2022. For policymakers, consolidation is both inevitable and desirable. LE Partners estimates that just 15 EV brands out of 129 will remain financially viable by 2030. Officials hope that eliminating weaker players will reduce overcapacity while shifting consumer focus from bargain hunting to technology and driving experience. BYD is simultaneously hedging against domestic pressures with an ambitious overseas expansion. In the first half of 2025, its overseas revenues surged 50%, accounting for more than 1/3 of the company's total. Exports rose 130% year-on-year, making BYD the fastest growing exporter among Chinese car makers. The company plans to begin production of its new plant in Hungary later this year to serve the European market, even as rivals like Leapmotor, in partnership with Stellantis, weigh localizing production amid high tariffs and costs. Yet industry leaders caution that the overseas market is, quote, not that simple, end quote. Rising trade barriers in Europe and shifting consumer preferences in China suggests the consolidation ahead may be as painful as it is transformative. For China's crowded EV industry, the era of unchecked expansion is over. What follows is survival of the fittest, and it's going to be brutal for the entire industry. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Thursday, and I will see you for this week's final episode either tomorrow or on Saturday.